At 2:07 a.m., the house was so quiet that even the refrigerator's hum sounded like gossip. The kind of calm that makes you feel like you're the only person alive, till you realize you're not. I wasn't supposed to be awake. That was the whole idea. One small white pill, a glass of water, a husband's calm voice pretending the world was regular. For your headache, he'd said earlier, like he was handing me a mint. Not a mystery. Maybe it was the way he watched me swallow that made my stomach tighten. Perhaps it was the way he smiled too fast, like he was relieved before I'd even done anything. Or maybe it was just 20 years of knowing a person's rhythm so well that when they miss a beat, you hear it. So I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid, faking a cold to skip school. I lifted the pill to my lips, tilted my head back, and let it slide into my cheek instead of my throat. I drank the water. I smiled. I acted sleepy. I let my eyelids droop like a curtain closing on a play I didn't trust. That part was easy. I'd been pretending for years. I'm Leanne Parker, 46 years old, living in a picture-perfect Michigan suburb where lawns are trimmed like hairlines and neighbors wave like they mean it. I'm also the kind of woman who organizes spice, racks by color, and remembers everyone's birthday, including the one dog down the street who isn't even ours. On paper, my life is stable. A husband who works in pharmaceuticals, 2 grown kids who call when they remember. A house that smells like lemon cleaner and old dreams. But on the inside, I'd been living with a quiet ache for a long time. Not just the headache that evening. I mean, the kind that sits behind your ribs when you realize you've been shrinking for a decade and nobody noticed. Earlier that night, I'd crawled into bed with a throbbing head and a feeling I couldn't name. Caleb, my husband, had come in 10 minutes later with that pill and that voice. The same voice he used for telemarketers, waiters, and anyone he wanted to keep calm and obedient. So yes, I pretended to swallow it, and yes, I pretended to fall asleep because something in me, call it instinct, call it exhaustion, call it gods. Last flicker of humor whispered, don't trust this moment. By 2 a.m., I learned why. Welcome, story lovers. It's from Where Are You Watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. I wasn't born suspicious. I was born soft. The kind of smooth that trusts people when they say, I've got you, even if their hands are empty. I grew up in a small Ohio town where the air smelled like cornfields and detergent. And everybody knew everybody's business before you did. My parents were decent people, but decent in the way that keeps survival moving, not dreams. My dad worked nights at the distribution plant. My mom cleaned houses. She wasn't ashamed of it, but she wore tired the way some women wear perfume. I was the oldest daughter. Translation: I learned early how to be useful. I tucked lunches, braided hair, folded laundry into neat squares, and read bills out loud so my mom could pretend she wasn't scared of the numbers. Still, I had dreams. I wanted to be a nurse. Not because I had some saintly calling, but because I loved order and care equally. I liked the idea that you could walk into chaos, learn how it worked, and gently fix it. I was good at school quietly. Good, like a lamp in the corner, nobody notices until it's the only light left. Scholarships were my escape route. The day I got accepted to a state university, my mom cried into a dish towel. She told everyone at church, like I'd just won an Olympic medal. Then life started doing what life does. My sophomore year, Dad got hurt on the job. A forklift accident. Nothing dramatic on the outside, but the kind of injury that turns a man into paperwork and physical therapy and silence at dinner. He couldn't work. Mom picked up more houses. I picked up more shifts by junior year. It wasn't just tuition I was paying. It was groceries. It was medication. It was the electric bill that kept creeping upward like it had a personal grudge. I didn't drop out. I adjusted. That's what women like me do. We don't collapse. We rearrange ourselves until we fit the emergency. I switched to part-time school, worked full-time at a nursing home, learned how to survive on vending machine dinners and 5 hours of sleep. It was at that nursing home that I met Caleb. He was there visiting his grandmother. And he had that Type of smile that makes you think he sees you, not just your uniform. He was older than me by 3 years, already in a master's program, already confident in a way that felt like gravity. He wasn't flashy. He was steady. That was his charm. He talked about building a future like he'd already checked the blueprints. He listened to me complain about my night shifts and my chemistry exams. He looked at me like I was admirable instead of desperate. When you're exhausted enough, admiration feels like love. We dated for 2 years. He'd bring me coffee during finals. He'd show up with soup when I got sick. He'd put his arm around me at family barbecues like I was already his wife. It felt safe. It felt like someone was finally choosing me for something other than what I could do. We got married this summer after I graduated. I imagined a life with teamwork. 2 adults are pulling the cart together. I imagined still becoming a nurse, working in pediatrics. Something that made all those school nights matter. Caleb got a job in pharmaceutical sales, then management. He was good at it. The kind of good that comes from being charming on command. His salary grew fast. Mine crawled. He started talking about the long game, about how my time would be better spent at home when we had kids. I didn't fight him. I thought compromise was the same thing as partnership. Our first child, Noah, arrived 2 years later. The second, Lauren, came 3 years after him. I loved him more than I knew a heart could love. The kind of love that makes you forget you used to be someone before motherhood. And motherhood wasn't the problem. I loved the sticky fingers, the school pickups, the way their voices felt like music. The problem was the shape my life took while I was loving them. Caleb's job required travel. First it was a few days a month, then a week, then 2. When he was home, he was tired. When he was gone, I was everything: parent, scheduler, cook, nurse, cleaner, emotional sponge. Every time I mentioned going back to work, he'd say something about timing. The kids were too little. The daycare costs were too high. We'd talk about it again next year. Next year kept getting rescheduled. At some point, I stopped asking. Not because I didn't want more, but because I had learned how to be in the background in my own life. My world became routine. Packing lunches, folding towels, signing field trip forms, smiling at other moms who looked equally exhausted but somehow more seen. And Caleb. Caleb became a man I organized my life around. His likes, his dislikes, his schedule, his temper that never roared but always simmered, like a pot you didn't dare touch. If I burned dinner, he didn't yell. He just went quiet. If I forgot to pay a bill, he didn't scold. Kay called it careless. One word. Sharp enough to make me spend the next month proving I wasn't. I learned to avoid conflict by being perfect. That's what makes a person slippery. You don't see them becoming controlling because they never have to shove you. They just keep moving the walls until you're living in a smaller room. When the kids got older, I found myself in an identity hangover. I'd given up my nursing path so slowly that I didn't notice I was standing still. I tried to reclaim pieces of myself in small ways. Online courses, community volunteering, even a part-time position at a local clinic. Caleb acted supportive. He always acted supportive. But there was a chill beneath it. A late side comment about how he hoped I wasn't trying to compete. A reminder that I didn't need the money. I laughed when I said I wanted to apply for a supervisory role. He never said no directly. He was smarter than that. He just made me feel silly for wanting yes. Then last year, my mother passed away. That loss cracked something open. Grief is a funny spotlight. It makes you see your life clearly because suddenly time feels expensive. After the funeral, I was sitting alone in my childhood bedroom looking at the yellowed posters on the wall. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something that was mine. Not for the kids, not for Caleb, not for the household me. So I started pushing softly at first. I asked for more say in finances. I asked about the retirement accounts I'd never seen. I asked questions that wives are apparently allowed to ask, but not too often. Caleb's smile got thinner. His patience got shorter. And then I started getting headaches. Not once in a while. Not after a stormy night's sleep. I mean, regularly. like my head had become a drum someone else was tapping. I blamed stress, menopause, the weird weather swings. Let's go. I even joked about needing to drink more water, like that was the cure for everything women feel. Caleb seemed more concerned than I expected. He brought home vitamins. He suggested a different pillow. He offered painkillers sometimes. Which brings us back to that night. The night I didn't swallow the pill, the night when my quiet, polite, good wife habits finally hit a wall. Because when you've been soft your whole life, people forget softness is not the same thing as weakness, and sometimes the gentlest people wake up the hardest. The first thing I learned at 2 a.m. was that your body knows the truth before your brain does. Even though I had fallen asleep, my senses stayed alert, like a dog that hears a strange car slowed down outside. I lay on my side with my back to Caleb, breathing deep and slow, counting beats in my head so he would think I was out cold. 10 minutes after the bedside light clicked off, I felt him move, not the normal shifting you do when you're getting comfortable. This was careful, measured, like a man trying not to wake a baby or a witness. He slid out of bed. I heard the soft scuff of his slippers. Then a pause, long enough that I imagined him standing in the dark looking at me to confirm I was truly asleep. My heart was suddenly thunderous. He left the room. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A bathroom trip. A glass of water. A normal reason to be awake at the hour when only raccoons and regret are active. But the house didn't make normal sounds. There was no faucet, no toilet flush, no microwave beep. Just quiet. And then the faint click of the office door down the hall. Caleb's office was a converted guest room that had slowly become his fortress. He worked there, took calls there, and locked it when he was traveling, like it was a vault. The click wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A lock. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, bargaining with my own curiosity. Maybe it was nothing. Perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe grief had made me paranoid. Possibly I had watched too many crime shows and was now applying them to my very boring suburban life. But here's the thing about decades of being talked out of your instincts. Once you start listening again, you can't unhear them. So I slid out of bed, bare feet on cold wood, moving like a thief in my own home. I felt ridiculous and brave at the same time. The hallway was dark, but moonlight from the window was enough to show the door at the end. There was a strip of light. Underneath it, Caleb didn't usually turn the office light on at night. He liked working from his laptop in dim spaces like he was a movie villain. Seeing that bright strip of light felt like witnessing a car idling in your driveway at 2 a.m. Not automatically criminal, but definitely nothing. I crept closer. Not even sure why I was being quiet. Habit 1 doesn't just stop being the person who tiptoes around everyone else's moods. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard voices too. Caleb's. And a woman's. At first, my brain offered a comforting explanation. Maybe a late call from the West Coast office. Maybe someone overseas. Maybe an emergency. Then the woman laughed. Not a coworker polite laugh. Not a we're both tired laugh. It was soft, familiar, intimate. Like she'd laughed in that room before. I froze. My entire marriage passed through my mind in a jumble of scenes. Newborns, vacations, arguments about money, his hand on my lower back at church like a display. I thought about his trips. His phone was face down on the table. It's the way he knew too much about my headaches lately. I felt nauseous, but I listened. The words weren't all clear, muffled by the door, but the tone was. Caleb was low-voiced and confident. The woman was playful. It's the way do people sound when they think they're alone. Then I heard something else. Paper shuffling. A drawer opening. A metallic clink like a keychain or a bottle cap. And then Caleb said something that cut through the door like a blade. Something about the dosage working like last time. I didn't hear the woman's reply. My ears were ringing. Dosage. Working. Last time, certain words don't make sense in a marriage. Unless something is horribly wrong. My hand went to the doorknob without permission from my brain. I didn't turn it. I just held it. Feeling the cold metal ground me, then the woman said something I could hear clearly enough. She was asking if she's asleep. "She's out," Caleb answered. "She trusts me." My body could have shattered into 1,000 pieces, it would have. I stepped back, trying not to make a sound. My breath felt like a wild animal in a cage. I stumbled down the hall, back into the bedroom, back into bed. Back into the role of sleeping wife. When Caleb returned 15 minutes later, I stayed still. I let my breathing stay slow. I let my face stay soft. He slid into bed, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it meant to lie beside a stranger who knows your body better than you do and is using that knowledge against you. I didn't sleep. When morning came, I moved through the kitchen like a ghost. Caleb acted normally. Normal as in extra nice. He made coffee. He asked how my head felt. He kissed my forehead. I smiled and said it felt better. Inside, I was watching a different movie now. One where I had to survive long enough to understand the plot. That day, while he was showering, I did something I'm not proud of but also don't regret. I went through his phone. I didn't find a trail of love poems. Caleb wasn't sloppy. He wasn't romantic. What I found were muted notifications from a number saved under a man's name, Derek Logistics. The texts were clinical on the surface, but once you've learned your husband's patterns, you can read between them. Meetings that weren't meetings. Supply drop jokes. A photo I couldn't open because it was in a locked folder. There was also a calendar entry for next Tuesday labeled QC visit. No location, no details. Just a block of time in the afternoon. I took screenshots and sent them to myself. I didn't know what I was collecting evidence for yet. A divorce, a confrontation, a crime show audition. All I knew was that my marriage had shifted from love story to crime scene overnight. By late afternoon, my headache returned. This time, sharper. Like my skull was being squeezed, Caleb offered another pill. Same casual kindness. I told him I'd already taken something earlier. He watched me longer than necessary. Then he nodded. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into the bathroom and looked at the pill still hidden in the tissue I'd stashed from the night before. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a detective. I'm a middle-aged woman who knows how to triage a crisis because life taught her. So I did the only thing I could think to do without blowing my cover. I took it to my friend Marcy. Marcy works at a vet clinic. She's one of those women who doesn't sugarcoat anything because she doesn't have time to babysit your denial. If the world is a mess, Marcy is the person who hands you gloves and says, "Let's get dirty." I told her I found a pill that made me uncomfortable. Not everything, not yet. I wasn't ready to say my husband might be drugging me. Saying it out loud felt like stepping into a nightmare you can't wake up from. She looked at it and frowned. She said it wasn't a standard over-the-counter painkiller. She said it looked closer to a sedative based on the markings. She couldn't confirm without lab equipment, but her face was enough. She didn't ask many questions. She just said if I felt unsafe, I should not take anything from him again, and I should consider seeing a doctor without him. I nodded like a woman taking advice from a neighbor. Inside, I was a woman trying to figure out how much danger she was in that weekend. I made an appointment with my primary care doctor and told Caleb it was a routine follow-up for migraines. He offered to come. I said no. I didn't want to waste his time. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Then kissed my cheek at the doctor's office. I told the truth. Not all of it. My headaches had become frequent and that I felt unusually groggy some nights after medication. The doctor ordered blood work. She asked what I was taking. I told her what Caleb had given me. She raised an eyebrow and said she'd like to see the bottle. I told her I'd bring it. I didn't have a bottle. Which was the point. Caleb didn't leave medication on the counter. He didn't store it in the cabinet. He carried it in his pocket like a tool. When I brought that up to Marcy later, she called it what it was. Deliberate. Between Monday and Tuesday, I lived as if every ordinary moment had a second meaning. Caleb's compliments felt rehearsed. His patience felt performative. His casual touch felt like a measurement. Meanwhile, I started quietly preparing. I made copies of the bank statements while he was at work. I found a savings account I didn't know existed. I located insurance policies. I checked the kitchen cameras. Yes, he had installed them last year for security. And yes, I had ignored the way that sounded less like protection and more like surveillance. Security is a funny word. It can mean safety. It can also mean control. By Tuesday afternoon, his QC visit, my stomach had become a knot that wouldn't loosen. Caleb dressed nicer than usual. Not a suit, but that polished, casual style that says, I'm meeting someone who matters. He told me he had a late work thing. Told me not to wait up. He said it like it was a favor. When he left, I did something I never expected to do. I followed him, not like a spy with sunglasses and a trench coat. More like a suburban mom in a Honda who kept 3 cars back and prayed her hands wouldn't shake on the wheel. He didn't go to his office. He didn't go to any facility I recognized. He drove to a quiet strip mall across town and parked behind a building that used to be a yoga studio. There was no sign, just dark windows and a back entrance. A woman met him there. Even from the car, I knew her not personally. But I knew her type. Late 30s maybe, hair too shiny to be natural, posture too confident to be innocent. She walked like the world owed her an apology. She touched his arm when she greeted him. He leaned closer. I sat in my car, heart pounding, feeling like a teenager watching her parents lie. They went inside together. I waited 15 minutes, then got out. My legs were bone-deep shaky. I walked to the back door like I owned the place. Like I wasn't a wife in the middle of a slow-motion betrayal. The door was locked. But there was a small frosted window beside it. I pressed my ear to the glass. Voices again. Papers again. Then something else. A name. Mine. The woman said it casually. Caleb responded as if this were a business file. I didn't hear every word. But I listened to enough fragments to build the horror. Talk about keeping her compliant, about the headaches being convenient, about timing it so she doesn't get suspicious. And then a sentence that turned my blood cold. Something about me signing something under sedation. If needed, I staggered back to my car and drove home on autopilot. I wasn't crying. I was beyond crying. I was in that strange numb altitude where grief and rage become one oxygenless thing. When Caleb came home that night, he was cheerful in the same way someone might be after a successful deal. He asked how my day was. I said fine. He asked if my head still hurt. I said no. He offered to take me out to dinner at a place I liked. I ate it while thinking about how easy it is to poison someone slowly if you smile the whole time. That night, I didn't pretend to take any pills. I told him I'd already taken Tylenol. He nodded, and I realized something terrifying. He didn't need me to take the pill every time. He just needed some compliance, some sleep, some proof that I was predictable. I lay in bed beside him, wide awake, and I decided I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not without a plan, because the moment you let someone know you know, that's the moment their story changes. Mine had already changed. Now, I had to write the next part carefully. The breaking point didn't come with fireworks. It came with an envelope. 3 mornings later, a FedEx package showed up addressed to me. Caleb was already at work. The driver left it on the porch like it was a sweater from Nordstrom. Nothing urgent. Nothing dangerous, but my hands knew better. Inside was a stack of documents with sticky tabs and a neat cover page. Real estate trust transfer signature required. My name was printed in bold. My signature line was highlighted. The instructions were written in plain language. Assuming I'd already agreed, I flipped through the pages. Heart racing. The trust was transferring ownership of the house, our house, into a private holding entity. The primary trustee, Caleb. The secondary trustee, a woman named Vanessa Rourke. Vanessa. The woman from the strip mall. I turned a page and saw a section about medical incapacity and consent. It referenced sedatives by category. It was written as if I were already a patient being. Managed. I sat at the dining table staring at those papers until my coffee went cold. My brain was trying to make sense of a reality that didn't fit inside any normal idea of marriage. Caleb wasn't just cheating, he was dismantling me, piece by piece, legally, chemically, quietly. The rage that rose in me wasn't loud. It was steady, low, like a furnace that finally caught fire. I called Marcy. She came over in 20 minutes. Hair still damp from her morning shower. No makeup, no hesitation. I put the documents on the table. She read them and went very still. Then she said what I couldn't know yet. This looked planned. Not impulsive. Not romantic, strategic. She told me to call a lawyer. I told her I didn't. Know which kind of lawyer you call when your husband is potentially sedating you to steal your life, she said to start. With a family attorney and a police report. If nothing else, we'd create a paper trail. We spent that afternoon making calls. By evening, I had a consultation the next day with a woman who specialized in domestic financial abuse. Marcy sat beside me while I explained everything in a shaky voice to a receptionist who sounded politely alarmed. That night, slept in the guest room with the door locked. I told Caleb I needed a quiet night because my headache was back. He looked annoyed for half a breath, then masked it as concern. He offered another pill. I said no. His eyes narrowed, then softened. Then he said okay. When he left the guest room, I cried into a pillow, not because I felt weak, but because I finally understood the shape of the danger. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. The next morning, I met the lawyer. Her office smelled like mint tea and competence. She listened without interrupting while I laid out the last week. The pill, the office call, the strip mall meeting, and the trust documents. She didn't widen her eyes or gasp dramatically. She just asked calm, precise questions. She told me that if what I suspected was true, it could be both civil and criminal. She told me to stop accepting any medication. She told me to get tested as soon as possible and to bring any physical evidence I had. Then she said something I hadn't expected. If I felt I was at immediate risk, I needed to leave the home. Leaving felt like detonating a bomb, but staying felt like waiting to be buried while still breathing. So I made a plan. Marcy offered her spare room. I packed a bag with clothes, copies of financial documents, the trust papers, the pill, and my passport. I left a note for Caleb that I was staying with Marcy for a few days to get my migraines under control and think. Not a confrontation. Not yet. Just a move. I watched the house in the rearview mirror as I drove away. It looked peaceful from the outside, the way traps often do. That afternoon, while I sat in Marcy's kitchen drinking tea and waiting for the lab results from the urgent care clinic, Caleb called. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. His voice was controlled, almost bored. He said he was worried. He said I was overreacting. He told me marriages go through phases, and my grief over Mom was making me spiral. I listened. Then I said I needed space. There was a pause. Then he said we'd talk when I was thinking clearly. That single sentence confirmed everything because I wasn't worried I heard in him. It was possession. The lab results came that evening. The doctor called me directly. She said there were substances in my blood, consistent with benzodiazepine sedatives at levels that didn't align with anything I'd reported taking. She asked if I might have been exposed unknowingly. My whole body went cold, then hot. I told her yes. She told me to report it immediately. So I did. The police officer who took my report was kind but careful. He said they'd need evidence. He said they'd talk to Caleb. He said I should be prepared for denial and counterclaims. I wasn't naive. It didn't hurt less. The next day, Caleb showed up at Marcy's house. He didn't knock softly. He hit like a man who believed doors ultimately belonged to him. Marcy opened it. She stood in the doorway like a bouncer in pajamas. I watched from the hallway, my pulse in my throat. Caleb's face was calm. His eyes weren't. He said he wanted to speak to his wife. Marcy said no. He said I was having a mental episode. Marcy said if he said that one more time, she'd start recording. He stepped past her anyway. That was the moment the floor shifted. He walked into the living room, found me standing there. Not sitting, not small, not apologetic. His expression flickered. Surprise, irritation, calculation. He asked what I was doing, not in a loving way, in an accounting way. Like he was trying to reconcile a line item that had moved without his permission. I told him I knew about the sedatives. I told him I knew about Vanessa. I told him I had blood tests, paperwork, and a lawyer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said it like a nurse delivering a complex diagnosis. His mouth tightened. Then he did what manipulators always do. When the mask slips, he tried to make me feel silly for bleeding. He said the pill was for my migraines. He said I was mistaken. He told Vanessa that he was a consultant. He said the trust documents were estate planning and I was being dramatic. He said I was. Paranoid, I let him talk. Then I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a voice memo. The strip mall. Window hadn't been the only thing I'd used that day. When I drove there the second time, I'd left my phone recording in my purse. The audio was imperfect, but the essential lines were clear. His voice. Her voice. My name. The words dosage, compliant, and signature. Caleb went still. It wasn't fear yet. It was disbelief. The kind of disbelief you see when someone who always wins realizes that rules have changed. I watched him shrink in a way I'd never seen before. Not physically, psychologically, like someone finally turned on the lights. In a room he'd been controlling in the dark, he told me to stop. He said I was making things worse. I told him things were already worse. I told him he didn't get to decide my reality anymore. He took a step forward. Marcy stepped between us. He said he wanted to talk privately. I said no. I said if he had anything to say, he could tell it with a witness. That's when his temper finally surfaced. Not explosive, Caleb doesn't explode. He cuts. He said no one would believe me. He said I had no career, no money of my own, no proof that would hold up. He said I was a grieving, unstable housewife trying to blow up her own marriage. He said I needed him. The sentence hit me like a slap and a gift at the same time. Because suddenly I saw the story he'd been living in all these years. In his story, I was the background. I was a support staff member. I was scenery. In my story, I had just become the main character again. I told him to leave. He laughed once, sharply. Then he said I'd regret it. He walked out. The air felt different after he left. Lighter and heavier at the same time. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. And that was the exact moment I understood what power really is. Power isn't loud. Power is the ability to say no when someone has trained you to say yes. Dear audience, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps. The weeks that followed were not a neat montage. They weren't cinematic in a tidy way. They were messy, bureaucratic, exhausting, and slow. But they were mine. Caleb denied everything. Of course he did. He hired a lawyer fast enough to make me wonder how long he'd practiced for this. He told mutual friends I was unwell. He called my sister to say I was having a breakdown. He filed for temporary financial control under the guise of protecting assets. And for a brief moment, the old me tried to surface, the me who would smooth things over, who would worry about what people thought, who would ask myself if I was overreacting. But that I had swallowed too many years already. My lawyer moved with precision. She submitted my blood test. She requested Caleb's pharmacy access records through Discovery. We found that he'd logged into a controlled medication system at work on dates that matched my headaches. The police investigation took longer, but it moved. Surveillance footage from the strip mall showed him entering it with Vanessa multiple times over several months. A subpoena revealed that the building was leased under her name, but funded through a shell company linked to Caleb's accounts. The trust documents were worse. They weren't estate planning. They were a trap. A financial transfer intended to make me legally irrelevant while I was chemically FOGGED. Vanessa was not a consultant. She was his girlfriend and his partner in a plan to secure money without a courtroom fight when the evidence became undeniable. Something surprising happened. People started believing me. Not all at once. Not loudly, but steadily. Like dominoes revealing a picture you couldn't see before. My daughter Lauren drove home from Chicago and sat on Marcy's couch holding my hand the way I once held hers during thunderstorms. My son Noah called from his grad program and cried in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 9. They didn't ask why, didn't notice sooner. They didn't blame me for trusting him. They just said they were sorry, and they were here. That mattered. The legal process ended in a settlement larger than I expected. The court granted me complete control over half of our assets, plus damages tied to medical harm and coercion. Caleb's company fired him after the subpoena exposed his misuse of controlled inventory. A licensing board opened its own investigation. There were no handcuffs in the dramatic way you see on TV. But consequences arrived with weight. Caleb moved out. Vanessa disappeared from the picture almost overnight. Funny how loyalty looks different when the bank accounts freeze and the spotlight turns on. For the first month, I felt like a person released from a prolonged fever. I'd wake up and not recognize the calm. I'd make tea and realize I wasn't bracing for someone's mood. I'd walk through a room and not feel watched. I started therapy. I found a women's support group where nobody flinched when I said the word drugged. No one asked me why I stayed so long. They'd all stayed in their own ways. We just sat together, learning how to rebuild a sense of self that had been quietly taken apart. I also went back to something I'd buried for decades. Nursing, not in a grand I'm going to conquer the world way at first. More like a woman returning to a childhood home. Checking if the door still fits her key, I enrolled in a refresher program at the community college. I started volunteering at a health clinic that served low-income families. The first day, I wore scrubs and felt like I was stepping back into a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. It wasn't easy. My brain was rusty. My confidence was thin. The younger students looked at me like I was brave or crazy. I wasn't sure which, but kept showing up. Because that's the thing about surviving someone else's control. You learn that the most radical act is choosing your own life. Over time, my headache stopped, not instantly, but steadily, as if my body had been holding its breath for years and was finally letting go. My doctor confirmed there were no lingering sedatives in my system now. My sleep got deeper. My laughter got louder. I bought a small condo closer to the clinic. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The walls weren't decorated for someone else's approval. The kitchen wasn't organized to anticipate criticism. I even hung a ridiculous painting in the hallway just because it made me laugh. I rebuilt friendships I'd let fade. I traveled with Marcy to Nashville for a weekend because we could, because no one told us we shouldn't. Because I wanted to remember what spontaneity felt like. One afternoon, while clearing out the last boxes from the old house, I found a photo of Caleb and me on our 10th anniversary. We looked happy. We probably were in the way people are so glad before they notice the cage. I didn't burn the photo. I didn't sob over it. I just looked at it and said to myself quietly, you did the best you could with what you knew then. And then I moved on. The real redemption wasn't the money. It wasn't Caleb's downfall. It wasn't the gossip that circled our town for a month like hungry birds. The redemption was this. I trusted myself again. I walked into rooms without shrinking. I made decisions without rehearsing apologies. I no longer apologize for taking up emotional space. And the wildest part? I didn't feel bitter. I felt free. Free is not a loud emotion. It's subtle. It arrives like fresh air in a room you didn't realize was stale. Now, when people ask how I'm doing, I tell the truth. I say I'm rebuilding. I say it's complex and beautiful. I say I'm learning who I am. Without fear and if they look uncomfortable. As if my truth is too sharp for polite conversation. I smile and remind myself that discomfort is not my job anymore. Because if a woman can survive betrayal in her own bed, she can survive the awkward silence at a dinner party. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories every week. Here's what nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't always look like a punch. Sometimes it seems like a pill in a loving hand. A smile that's a little too smooth. I trust me from someone who benefits when you do. For years, I thought love meant being easy to live with, being agreeable, being stable enough that nobody had to worry about you. But real love doesn't require you to disappear. If anything, real love makes room for all of you, even the parts that ask questions, especially the parts that ask questions. When I look back now, I don't just see a marriage gone wrong. I see a slow lesson in how control can masquerade as care. Caleb didn't start out evil. Most people don't. But entitlement grows in dark places. It feeds on silence. It flourishes when someone else is trained to take responsibility for everything. That goes wrong. The scariest part wasn't that he planned to drug me. The scariest part was how easy he thought it would be. How normal it felt to him to talk about my body like a project. My consent is like a detail. My life is like a spreadsheet line. He believed my softness meant I'd never fight back. He was wrong. And maybe that's the takeaway for anyone listening who feels small in their own home, or invisible in their own marriage, or unsure whether the discomfort in their gut is real. Your instincts are not drama. They are data. They are your nervous system, waving a flag when your mind is tired of pretending. If something feels off, you don't need a perfect explanation to honor that feeling. You just need enough courage to pause and listen. Because sometimes the moment that saves you looks ordinary, a missed swallow. A quiet decision, a locked door you finally refuse to unlock. One last twist. Though a month after the settlement, I received a letter from the licensing board. Investigating Caleb inside was a brief note from a woman I didn't know. Another wife. She wrote that she had heard about my case through a friend and finally felt brave enough to get tested herself. She found the same sedatives in her blood. She had her own paper trail now, her own way out. She said she didn't know me, but I had unknowingly helped save her life. I sat with that letter for a long time, not because I felt like a hero, but because it reminded me how stories ripple. How one woman's survival can become another woman's permission. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt that quiet warning inside you, don't ignore it. And if you've already ignored it for years, it's not too late to start listening now. After all, how many times does life whisper before it finally screams? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.